We're looking at a section of Lyn Hejinian's My Life, and the little tagline, the epigraph, is the obvious analogies with music. In the first sentence of this series of 45 new sentences, 37 if you're listening to the audio, is, "It was a mountain creek running over little pebbles of white quartz and mica." So, first of all, let me ask where some of these sentences come from. And when I say where, I mean what vocabularies, what discourses, what rhetorics, right? Some are sensory memory imagistic, some are later reckonings, some are historical, some are political, some are very personal. So, who wants to start? Let's throw on, where does it come from? What are the vocabularies? She's mixing them, just as Silliman does in Albany. Dave?
Well, this is a metaphorical image that she's using.
Which one?
The first sentence, it was a mountain creek running over little pebbles of white quartz and mica.
So I don't know what you mean by metaphorical, because I see that as almost non-metaphorical. I see it as a direct.
But I'm not sure what it is.
Okay. So anybody want to help us out? What kind of, Emily, we were talking about that with you before. What kind of sentence is that?
It sounds like something out of some type of travel magazine. So it's purely descriptive, concrete writing.
Okay, I don't get travel magazine at all. I get like visceral memory.
Yeah,
Molly?
It's like a hiking trip taken as a child, and it's synesthesia because it's both sort of the sound of the creek, which we hear without even her telling us there's a sound, and the visual of the white quartz.
There's no agreement about the discourse here, and there needn't be. But I'm just going to stipulate, so we'll move on. That I'd like to put this in the bin of kind of visceral child memory. But all right, what else do we have?
We also have, even the next sentence, let's say that every possibility waits.
There's a generalization.
Kind of a generalization. It could be something that someone said to her once. It could be something that she's just kind of thinking. It could be something that maybe she saw like an advertisement. You never know. You don't know where that particular...
And do you want to try to do the work of creating the 27th letter of the alphabet meaning between the two?
I don't think so.
That's hard, right? Does anybody want to try to do it? Or should we pass? You've got that visceral memory moment about a mountain creek, and then you've got this generalization about possibility waiting. How could we encounter in chapter 9 of our course the word possibility without doing something with it? No? Amaris, you're smiling. That means you've got to do it.
Well, I just feel like that sentence is aphoristic, perhaps in the same way that Dickinson is, dwelling in possibility. So maybe we just have to wait for the juxtaposition.
Let's contend that every possibility waits. So we'll wait. We have to wait for what it means, but also the memory of this very kind of naturalistic memory seems to open out to anything the way an imagist poem does. That first line could be a kind of imagist poem, and in a way, possibility comes from there. Okay, other sentences. I was sipping Shirley Temple's wearing my Mary Janes. We've talked about that, but what kind of sentence is that?
It's like an Americana phrasing. We're talking about, things that evoke a certain sense of time and place.
Okay. If someone came up to you and said that grammatically and rhetorically, what discourse world would that come from?
It's just telling the past.
Yes, they're remembering something or saying something that just happened. This is what I was doing. Except that Shirley Temple's and Mary Jane's, those two phrases resonate together. How?
Shirley Temple, Mary Jane.
They're names given to things. They're almost marketing names, with all due respect to Shirley Temple. Right, that couldn't be her given name. There's something ridiculously cute and girly about that name in itself, and Mary Jane's is the same way. That's a marketing tool. So she's, in a sense, learning, and I'm going to ask those who went through American Girlhood maybe to comment more than I on this, but it's almost as if she's beginning the first reckonings that boys and girls, in this case girls, get of stepping into the pre-made, linguistic, marketed image. You almost feel like you're growing up into American Girlhood just by encountering and accepting these phrases.
Or products, for that matter.
So let's just do a left wing or maybe a right wing attack on the America that creates this kind of language that essentially, can we do a feminist reading of this? That essentially, though Hejinian is resisting it, if she didn't resist it, if she were writing this in order and became the woman who comes from the girlhood that's socialized to do the Shirley Temples and the Mary Janes, what can we say that's wrong with a discourse that kind of forces you into that selfhood? I kind of set it up a little bit too much, but Amaris, you want to take a shot at that?
Maybe by unconsciously conforming to the language of Shirley Temples and Mary Janes, she sort of lost her individuality in her childhood, something that she's only conscious of now looking back retrospectively. So the text is self-aware in that way.
It's very playful because it uses that phrase and discloses the fact that they're little marketing phrases. And then we get the grandfather right after that. Does anybody want to do the juxtapositional reading of the grandfather following the Mary Janes and Shirley Temples? Kristen?
Well, the difference is that, as a 5-6-year-old girl, Lyn is, her role is to sit Shirley Temples and wear Mary Janes, and that's what she's supposed to do, and that's what girls are meant to do in this time period.
And then she's got this grandfather.
And her grandfather, he should have been a general, but he wasn't quite the right age. But he's going to still have that.
Or maybe he shouldn't be, but he's still the kind of man who, what? He walks with a cane, he's out there having his constitutional.
Yes.
Right? And does he salute? No, he just says, he tips his hat. Morning. And then if it's afternoon, evening. I love evening, by the way. That's
At
so
2 in the afternoon.
Yeah, that's so a language of its time. Right? That's not you, but certainly I, growing up. That would, anything afternoon could be referred to as evening. Okay, so there's not afternoon.
Nice.
So there's what do we have? What's evoked here?
It's like gender roles, like she's meant to wear the Mary Janes and he's meant to wear the general's
To
uniform.
be militaristic and martial.
Well, and the mother, 2 sentences before that, the mother of the birthday child at every party serves the
goodness,
ice
it's
cream with the cake
perfect.
baked into it. It's such this 1950s.
In a way, collage of this, it's 50s in the sense that it's post-war. It's really 1940s, late 40s. But really, the 50s, in my opinion, starts from August of 1945 or maybe 1946 to 1960. That's the 50s. So you get this, in a way, one of the ways to present this post-war, this peaceful boom, this economic boom, this what many people see as a kind of suburbanization of American values, and the kind of imposition of a concept of the family and therefore of the self, that if you wanted to evoke this period, you could almost do it through a series of collage images. And in a way, that's what she's doing. Right? She's presenting us scenes from a life, but it could be any life, any American life. Okay. And then what's the one that follows Grandpa?
The tantrum.
It's a tantrum. Out of the blue. Broke out blue. I assume that means like out of the blue, without a breath of air. Whose tantrum? Not Grandpa's, probably.
Could be hers, another child.
Yeah, it's a child's. So you get this. You get the cake, the celebration. The war is over. You get the girl rising into girlhood. Also part of the cake thing, the kind of somewhat girlhoody luxuriating of the drink and the nice shoes and so forth. And then you get grandfather, who's kind of still in the military mode and patriarchal, and then you get a tantrum. And then you get this line that was added that Anna mentioned earlier. Dave, you read this one. I was an object of time filled with dread.
I think it's interesting that was added later, but to me that calls up memories of being a kid and feeling like there's just too much time. I've got nothing to do, but at the same time combining it with how she was worried her parents would move up, would pack up and move out. It just seemed like she was always caught in this nervous feeling of waiting. This time is just too much.
Well, sure, and kids throw tantrums because they can't process their feelings. All they know is
And they're also not
upset.
in control of pretty much anything.
Well, right. Being an object of time, to me, says that she's subject to the whims of everything, the passage of time and the actions of the people around her. She has no agency. And then she's got this sort of background of these fears. The spiders in the ice cream cone is right after that.
What is it about the ice cream cone of your childhood that, leave Lyn Hejinian aside and just be a kid and get the ice cream cone? What is that? What's the association?
Oh, it's like a major treat.
It's just so
You
great.
know, it's so great because, it's not the same if you get like an ice cream cone that you like have a box of ice cream cones in your house and you just like lump it. It's not the same.
You've gone out and you've gotten it, but little Lyn, is she's looking to see if there's a spider. There's something pathetic and beautiful, and I'm not imposing this on us, but if I had time and were on my own, I would do a reading of this as this is the post-war syndrome. This is the child coming out of the war, coming of age, coming of consciousness, linguistically and socially, culturally, and really economically, because there are things now happening, birthday cakes and ice cream cones and Mary Janes, after a time of privation and anxiety. I mean, really, world existence anxiety. And she's still got one little baby foot in the old world, the world of her grandparents' house, the world of her grandfather's patriarchy. And she's got one foot in this modern world of the people of my generation who were given everything and who in the 60s basically rejected the ease with which we got this given to us. And one of the things that got given her is the language as it is with all of its valences. So I tend to read this really as about the war and emerging from the war, those fears. Children who go through a war, even on the home front like this. So she was in San Francisco, and there was some real fear about what would happen on the Japanese front, in the Pacific, mostly unrealized fears. But nonetheless, when a child grows up with that fear and they're given something, don't worry, this is pure innocent, just an ice cream. Oh, come on, Lyn, just eat your ice cream cone. I'm like, I don't know, it's got spiders. So it's, really very moving to me. All right, let's skip ahead. Anything else you want to say? Stood in produce and ate raw peas. That's a nice one. Mm-hmm. Nothing to say other than what it is?
I want to skip ahead to the part where the man comes with the pinto pony.
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
They think of him as a cowboy, not because he has a pony and is wearing a cowboy hat,
Right.
but because he says 2 bits.
Explain that.
So his speech leads them to believe that he's a real cowboy. He talks the talk.
Language.
Instead of the fact that he's wearing this costume and has this pony. Anyone can do that, but if you talk the talk, then you really are a cowboy.
One imagines this guy, probably a guy from San Francisco, from the Tenderloin district or something, coming and putting a hat on and having this poor little pony come into the neighborhood where the girls are and the guys, and he says, "Come on, get your ride on the old pony, fresh from Oklahoma. It's only 2 bits." What are 2 bits?
It's a quarter. And
Right, 2 bits. It's an old-fashioned way of saying it, a cowboy way of saying it. And so what does little Lyn think?
she thinks that since he has this language, that he's the real deal. And
Can you extract from that? Like some
that
larger...
that language constructs you into a certain type of being, and that you can construct yourself into a certain character if you speak in a certain way.
And Miss Sly?
Miss
first
Sly,
grade teacher?
yeah. She's Sly, she wasn't originally Sly, but her name made her so. And so being named Sly has given her, people are predisposed to think of her as, she must not be the nicest, prettiest lady. She must be kind of, sneaky.
So implicitly, Lyn Hejinian is saying, remember, this is a critique of the unified subject, that is language poetry, a critique of voice, a critique of the ego psychology that underwrites the notion that the self can express itself and that what you're reading is the pure expression that comes from inside. Take that critique, which certainly this engages in, and apply it to the cowboy, so-called cowboy with his 2 bits language, and Miss Sly, and you get implicitly a warning from Lyn Hejinian. Watch out. Go ahead, somebody. Watch out. What will happen if you don't see your coming of age as a coming into consciousness about the way language shapes us? and establishes our values. Anybody want to riff a little further on that, Anna?
Well, it gets back to what we were talking about earlier with Grenier.
Robert Grenier, I
yeah.
hate speech.
I know he said that composition functioning in the composition of the world. So if you think about language as composition, the way that you compose your language is going to be the way that your world is composed. So I think what maybe what Hejinian and what Stein do with their composition is to break down the artifice of composition, break down, the kind of traditional modes of narration, which are not accurate. They're artificial compositions. And what she's
they're
saying,
not inaccurate. It's just that they are artifice.
Sure.
Right.
So
more or less accurate than any language is language, right? It's not that the language self is languaged, so that language gives us a view of the self that got languaged, or the language that made the self what it is. Language is not transparent. This is not Windex language, but stained glass language, so that you look through the language and you're not necessarily going to see some original true self. This is what Lyn Hejinian is. Go ahead, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, so I mean, if we just even look back at, we keep coming back to this, but the Shirley Temple's Mary Jane's line, and even juxtaposing that with the two bits, if you think about the way that their language constructs those two selves and the difference in those two selves, I think we have there kind of like her critique of how this language works.
And both of those instances are constructions of American culture. One looking back, a kind of pseudo-history of the cowboy, and the other, this girlhood, which really is imposing quietly, lusciously, in a friendly kind of, come on, we're the Mary Jane's way, helping the girl compose her American self, her feminized self, as distinct from Grandpa. These are very specific cultural markers. So, what else? What else? She goes to the bathroom. She vomits secretly because
She longs for her mother.
she misses her mother. Do you want to say anything about that, Emily?
Well, I just remember that list you read of all her earlier fears about getting lost, being homesick, of spiders and her ice cream cone. They're all about this type of displacement, this disruption, what you're talking about. And so that disruption, to define her childhood by creating these phobias, and then for her to use disruption as her poetic practice, and her kind of structure or non-structure seems sort of lovely and resonant.
What happens in a life when you go to school? I mean, this is a young girl. She's what, 6? Is that when you go to school?
You go when you're 5.
5. She's 5 to 6 in this particular year. What happens? Talk about the development of the ego. What's going on here?
I mean, it feels constructed by others. You sort of are very acceptant and vulnerable to external definitions before you can create yourself and recreate
This
yourself.
is a turmoil moment, right? But why do you miss mom? It's a fairly obvious question, but
I mean, it's protective. It's the womb. It feels safe, nurturing.
what role does the mother play in this section? Earlier in this section?
She's the birthday cake maker.
Yes. Well, all the moms, right? And in an earlier section, what role does mother play?
Her childhood was a holy melodrama.
Right. So now Lyn goes to school. This is the moment where you get socialized by another set of agents, and you move out of the sphere of the domestic, and it makes her sick, followed by a much later thought, now, bid chaos welcome. What could she possibly mean? Or what meaning do we construct from that juxtaposition?
I don't know, but I had a tendency when I was reading my life to interpret a lot of it metapoetically. So that anecdote might be factually accurate or not. I saw it as maybe that sort of like Steinian accumulation that she talks about and Let Us Describe, I believe, where it's sort of this bodily, just disorganized chaos but it's more authentic in that sort of illogical structure than would be the artificial conventional narrative that Anna was talking about. So when she says undone is not done, it's not in the sense that Hejinian's way of writing lacks any meaning or beauty at all. It's recreating it in a new way, which requires a committee, all
So translate
translators.
that. Undone is not the same as not done. Translate.
Right, it's a double negative, so it's not, it's just,
It's not
getting rid
that
of
we
the
didn't do
binary.
it. It's that we undid it.
right.
Difference?
Yes.
What's the difference?
Is it doing and undoing?
Intentional.
This is undoing. What we are reading is undoing, or an attempt to undo the layers and layers of encrusted, socially valued language imposition on the self, who at 37 and 45 takes it to be her mission to reproduce the way in which the word disappeared and the world appeared, to use the phrase from Ron Silliman, disappearance of the word, appearance of the world. Let's go back to the appearance, the reappearance of the word. We were worded, we were languaged. Undone is undoing that to some extent, rather than not doing it at all. So this is meta-consciousness about the way in which we get created. Now bid chaos welcome. Let's try one more time. Let's conclude with that. Now bid, come on, bring it on. Bring what on? Emily, now bid chaos welcome.
Accept that disorder, the disorder which is the natural state of things rather than the artificial order that we impose on it.
Cool. Dave, you want to say something? While I'm asking Dave, I'm going to add, I've not done this yet, but I'm going to ask Max to type in bid chaos welcome. I believe it's the language of invocation, of poetic invocation. I think it might even be from Milton. Dave? Bid chaos welcome.
I agree with what Emily said. Bring on life. Bring on
But
the
what kind of life? Chaos.
right. The life
This
that
is
you-
not the
you don't
order
have-
of a traditional memoir.
You don't have the control anymore.
Anna, bid chaos welcome.
It sounds almost like Shakespearean to me.
What is she asking? What does she want?
She wants all of life, warts and all.
Molly?
Well, I juxtapose it with or I put it together with the sentence before. As a child, like, you go out there unprotected at 5 years old, and it's like, bring on the world.
Max, did you come up with something?
Just now. It's the name of a blog.
We'll post this.
I'm like,
We'll post this. I believe it echoes Miltonic invocation.
well, God created the heavens and the earth out of chaos, right? So it's like this pre-creation moment.
And in Milton, it's the calling of the muse to take the chaos of what happened and make it ordered in a harmonious description of language. And this is undoing that to some degree. This is an invocation of chaos and of discontinuity. And discontinuity is the way these lives get constructed, and it needs to be the way in which we tell it.